Okay, now let's look at three terms with a coefficient. And what I mean by with a coefficient is all the examples here have a number sitting in front of the first variable. And so that's considered a coefficient. And when that happens, you first want to ask yourself, does it have a common factor? So what I mean by that is like what we did in 5.1. If you haven't watched that video, go back and watch common factors. But you go to the smallest number 3 and ask yourself, will 3 divide into 9? Yes. Will 3 divide into 30? Yes. And if it will, then 3 is the common factor for all three of those numbers. So you're going to bring your 3 out front, and then to get what goes inside, you're going to divide. So 3x squared divided by 3 is x squared, plus 9x divided by 3 is 3x, minus comes down, 30 divided by 3 is 10. So you divided everything by that common factor. Now what makes this one different than the ones you had in the beginning is now you're left with 3 terms that can still be factored. This 3 is going to come down, but you're going to factor what's left by reading it backwards. So you want factors of 10 that subtract to be 3. So my factors of 10 are 1 times 10 and 2 times 5. Which ones subtract to be 3? Would be 2 and 5. So we're going to do largest first, smallest second. Then we're going to look at our x's. X would break up to be x and x. The first sign always comes down, and then the last sign doesn't come down. You look up at it, and if you're subtracting, the signs in your answer have to be different. So if this one's plus, this one would be minus. Oops, wrong color. Now, if you're having trouble with those signs, go watch the previous episode because I explain them in detail about how to get the signs. And so that's your answer. Now let's look at the second example though, and you do want to check for a common factor, but you see that 3 won't divide into 10 and 3 won't divide into 7, so it does not have a common factor. So then we're going to go to what I call multiply, divide, reduce. And so the first thing we're going to do is take this first number 3 and we're going to multiply it times that last number. So 3 times 7 is 21. And that's what I want factors of. So I want factors of 21. I'm still going to read it backwards here though, that add to be 10. So what are my factors of 21? If you don't know, remember you can always list your numbers and just divide. 21 divided by 1 is 21. 21 divided by 2 is a decimal, so that doesn't work. 21 divided by 3 is 7. Now we want the ones that add to be 10, so that would be 3 and 7. They multiply to give you 21, but they add to give you 10. So now we're going to move to our answer and do just like we've been doing in the previous lesson, which is where we always put the largest one first, the smallest one second. Our letter here is a squared, so we're going to do an A and an A. The first sign's going to come down, and the last sign tells us we're adding, so these signs have to be alike. It has to be the same as the first one. Okay, but we're not finished because all we did so far is multiply. Now we have to divide. Because we multiplied by 3, now we need to divide by 3 and then reduce those fractions. So we're going to look at the first fraction, 7/3, but 3 won't go into 7, so that one won't reduce at all, so we're going to leave that as a 7/3. But the second fraction, 3 divided by 3 is 1, so that one reduced. And now the final step, if you're left with a fraction, is take that bottom number or the denominator and move it to the front. So this becomes a 3a plus 7 and an a plus 1. And that's your final answer. But remember to always check by multiplying it back out. Does 3a times a equal 3a squared? Yes. Does the outside plus the inside, 3a plus 7a is 10a, and then 7 times 1 is 7. So that's the correct answer. Okay, let's look at this last one. Same thing, a little bit harder. There's not a common factor. There's no number that'll go into 5, 12, and 11, so we aren't going to do the common factor. We're going to do the multiply, divide, reduce. So first we're going to multiply and say 12 times 5 is 60. And that's what I want to look at, factors of 60. I'm still going to read the rest of it back that subtract to be 11. So what are my factors of 60? You can just list your numbers and start by dividing. So 60 divided by 1 is 60. 60 divided by 2 is 30. 60 divided by 3 is 20. 60 divided by 4 is 15. 60 divided by 5 is 12. And 60 divided by 6 is 10. But we want the one that subtracts to be 11. So that would be 4 and 15. They multiply to give you 60, but they subtract to give you 11. Okay, so we multiplied. Now we're going to move them into our parentheses. So remember, you always want the largest one first, smallest one second. Your letter here is X and X. First sign comes down, and then you look up at the last sign. You're subtracting, so the signs have to be different. So if this one's negative, this one's plus. Remember, that last one doesn't come down. You have to think, if they're adding, it's alike. Subtracting, they're different. Okay, so we've multiplied. Now we need to divide. So because we multiplied by 12, now we're going to divide by 12 and then reduce those fractions. So this one's a little bit harder, but we're just going to reduce them. So the first one, 3 would go into both of them. So 15 divided by 3 is 5. 12 divided by 3 is 4. The second one, 4 would go into both of them. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. 12 divided by 4 is 3. So we reduced our fractions. And now the last step is to take the bottom number to the front, or the denominator to the front. And so this becomes a 4x minus 5 and a 3x plus 1. And that's your answer. But again, always check yourself. Does 4 times 3 equal 12? Yes. Does 4 and a negative 15 equal negative 11? Yes. And does negative 5 plus 1 equal negative 5? Yes. So we did them correctly.